So today's question is a Weagle sequence. A Weagle sequence is a sequence in which we will be getting an array, and the difference between the first, if it starts as a positive difference, then the rest of the then the next will be negative difference. The difference between the next two elements will be again positive. Then the difference between the next two elements will be negative, and similarly it will continue. So it has to be either, if it is starting with positive, then the next will be negative, and if it is starting with negative, then the next will be positive. So it has to be in a sequence like that. So first positive, then negative, then positive, then negative, then positive, then negative. It will continue like this. So if the array have a difference between the elements in this order, then that array is a Weagle sequence. Now we can see the two examples in which the first example shows it is a Weagle sequence, and over here it is not a Weagle sequence because it's constantly increasing. So it has to be something like the first value increased, then the second value decreased, and then the second is greater than the third value, then fourth value is greater than the third value, and then fifth value is greater than the fourth value. So sequentially it will be either positive difference or negative difference. So it will continue like this. And if both the numbers are equal, in that scenario also it will not be considered as a Weagle sequence because the difference is 0. So now we have to understand what a subsequence is. A subsequence is, so if we remove certain elements from this array to make it a Weagle sequence, that is a Weagle subsequence. A subsequence is obtained by deleting some elements, possibly 0, from the original sequence, leaving the remaining elements in their original order. Given an integer array nums, return the length of the longest Weagle sequence of nums. So now let's see the examples. Now let's see how this example is a Weagle sequence. First of all, we have this input array. In this input, we have the difference between the first two elements as positive. So what we are doing over here, we are subtracting I plus 1 element from ith element. So first we will be subtracting first index with a 0th index. So we have a positive difference because obviously the 17 is larger than 1. So 17 minus 1, that gives us 16, which is a positive value. Similarly, if we are subtracting 17 from 5, that gives us a negative value. Then when we are subtracting 5 from 10, we get a 10 from 5, we get a positive value. And then 13 from 10, we get a positive value again. Then 15 from 13, we get a positive value. Then 10 from 15, we get a negative value. Then 5 from 10, then 5 from 10, we get a negative value again. Then 16 from 5, we get a positive value. And then 8 from 16, so we get a negative value. So now let's see how we can make this a Weagle sequence, subsequence. So this is our sequence of positive and negative values, but ultimately we have to figure out what is the largest Weagle subsequence that we can create out of it. So we have positive in the first, then we get negative, then we have positive, then we have positive. So we will remove this positive. We want the next negative, so we get a negative. Then we want the next positive, so we get a positive, we get a positive. So ultimately the difference between six differences that we have got is going to give us the Weagle sequence. But this is the difference between elements. But if we have to figure out how many elements are there, so if we have 3 numbers, the difference between 3 numbers is this number and this number. So we have 3 numbers over here, and the difference between the 3 numbers will be 2 numbers. Let it be x and y. So ultimately the number of differences is always going to be 1 less than the number of elements from which we are creating this array. So because of this, we will just add 1 to it, and our result is 7. So that's why we have got 7. So now let's see how we can code this thing. Now over here we need to understand if the length is maybe 2 elements we have, in that scenario we will just get one number plus whatever over here it is plus, it can also be negative, and plus we have to add +1 to it because ultimately 2 digits. So for a scenario where we have length as less than 2, so our number of our output is will be equal to the length of that array. So if the input is empty array, then we will have 0. The Weagle subsequence will be of 0th length, and then if we have one value, then it is going to be 1. But if we go higher, there are going to be more values in the Weagle subsequence. So now over here we have to figure out the logic for the code. As we have already understood, we want the difference between the values, but to figure out the alternative difference, the pattern of the alternative difference in this array, we first need to figure out what is the difference between the first 2 digits. So if it is negative, then the next value should be positive, and if it is positive, then the next value should be negative. So considering that, first we will subtract our array over here from we will subtract the first value from the 0th value, and now with this, if we get a difference, so this is our previous difference. I'll tell you why we have written it previous difference, but consider it to be the first difference right now. And the previous difference over here is going to be either positive or negative, and to check that we have to just simply check if it is greater than equals to 0 or not. So if we will initially create a counter. If previous difference is not equals to 0, so how we are checking if it is equals to 0 or not? First we have to check, like, if both the values are equal. In that scenario it will not be considered as a Weagle subsequence. So in that scenario it will be, if both the values are not equal, then we will count 2, otherwise we will count 1, because ultimately we have to add one value to the end of the subsequence array. After the whole calculation of positive and negative, we just saw that we added 1. So whatever we were doing over there, the same thing is happening in this counter initially itself. And now as we have got our counter set, so these are the initial values. Now when we are iterating, we are running our for loop in this array. First we will be checking 17 minus 1. So when we are checking 17 minus 1, we get 16. 16 is a positive value. We will check if the current difference is greater than, so we have to check if the current difference, so we will be checking if the current difference, so our previous difference was 16, was also 16. So if current difference, this is the current difference, if current difference is greater than 0 and previous difference is less than 0, so we have to make a condition less than equals to 0. So we have to make a condition like this: when the current difference is positive, previous difference should be negative, And similarly, or current difference is less than 0 and previous difference is greater than equals to 0. Now over here we are basically checking what is the previous difference, what is the current difference. If the previous difference is, suppose like for our scenario it was positive, we checked, we got 16 for the first iteration, 16 and 16 both are positive, so we'll not get into this if statement. But when we subtract 5 minus 17 over here as our second iteration, so 5 minus 17 is going to give us minus 12. So minus 12 is a negative value. Our previous difference is stored as positive value as it was 16 previously. And in this if statement, what we are going to do, we are going to update the previous difference. So we will be updating the previous difference with the current difference. So now when it was 16, we didn't do anything because both were positive. Now when it is negative, when it is minus 12, we got to know, okay, current difference is smaller than 0 and previous difference is greater than 0. In that scenario, we will get into the loop. We will run the counter also. We'll increment the counter over here with plus plus, and the previous difference is going to be equals to current difference because we are now making the previous difference as negative. So first it was positive, then it became negative. Our previous difference became negative with negative 12 value itself. And next, until unless both the difference are alternative, so our next, maybe if we get a positive difference, so for this, if we have to execute this, next it will be 13 minus 10, so it will be a positive value. We'll get to see, okay, so first it will be 10 minus 5, so that is a positive value, that is plus 5. And now plus 5 is the current difference and the previous difference was 12. And now we'll get to know, okay, we'll get into this loop we'll get into this if statement again. And when we get into this if statement, I store plus 5 and I increment the counter to 3. And similarly, it will next we will be comparing 10 and 13 over here. So when we are comparing 10 and 13, we get plus 3. We will not be adding the value to the previous difference because both the values are positive. Our current difference is also positive, our previous difference is also positive. Now what we have to do, we will skip this and we'll get to the next iteration of the loop. And now we'll be comparing 13 and 15. So when we are comparing 13 and 15, we get a distance of plus 2. So our current difference is plus 2 and our previous difference is plus 5. So again, we will not be doing anything. Next, we have 15 and 10. So when we have 15 and 10, our current difference becomes 5. And now as we have minus 5, we will get in the loop, will increment our counter to 4, and then similarly this thing will happen as it become minus 5. So until unless we get a negative value from a positive value, we will be skipping those values and it will not get inside our if statement, because in our if statement we have the current and the previous difference which need to be alternative to each other. So if it is current positive, then previous will be negative, and if it is current negative, the previous will be positive. So yeah, that's how we are going to write the code, and ultimately whatever value you are getting in the end for the counter, we have to console log that. So it is a for loop, and because of this, and we are not doing anything apart from iterating from the values in a sequential order. So our time complexity becomes O of n and our space complexity becomes O of 1, because we are doing it in constant space because we are not taking any extra array or anything else over here. So yeah, that's our solution, and let's write the code now. So we have understood how this is going to be done. So let's write the code now. So this is our vehicle max length, and this is our nums array that we will be getting. And now, as we have discussed, first we will be checking if nums.length is greater than, is less than 2 or not. Return nums.length. So for 0 it will be 0, for 1 it will be 1. And now where previous diff equals to nums. First we will be taking one index and then nums 0. So this becomes our initial value, where counter equals to previous difference. So over here we are checking if previous difference is equals to 0 or not. If it is equals to 0, if it is not equals to 0, we'll store the value 2, otherwise we'll store the value 1 for the counter. For where I equals to 1 and I less than equals to less than nums.length, I plus plus. And now, as we have discussed, the if statement will be here. I'll first store the current difference in a variable, and the current difference becomes nums I minus nums I minus 1. So we are subtracting the ith value from the I minus 1 value. And in this if statement, as we have to check if the current difference is positive, then the previous difference should be negative. So we will check if current difference is positive and previous difference is less than equals to 0, or this is our one condition, but there is another condition. So it is exactly the opposite thing. So if our current difference is less than 0, previous difference should be greater than equals to 0. And our counter will increment over here, and the next thing, we are going to update the previous difference. So if it is a positive value, it becomes negative value when the condition is satisfied, and next with that negative value we'll be trying to find the next positive value. So at the end we just have to return the counter. Now let's run the code and try it out. We have some issue. Okay, that should be nums. Run the code. Perfect. And let's submit it. We have submitted the code and it works fine. Let's check. So we have a similar question: arrange array elements by sign. So after this question is done, you can jump into this question as well. So thank you.